Silas Cain's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He stood at the auction rail, dust coating his throat, watching them drag a woman into the ring like she was nothing. Roped at the wrists, stumbling behind two bay horses, head down, barefoot in the dirt. The auctioneer laughed. "Take her too. She's worthless." Every man in that yard grinned. Silas didn't. He reached into his pocket, counted his last coins, and said the only words that mattered. "Untie her." That decision would cost him everything, and save him from something worse. Before we begin, if stories like this move you, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. "Next lot, 2 bay geldings, sound enough if you ain't picky." Silas Cain pulled his hat lower and stepped closer to the rail. He didn't want to be here. He'd told himself that 3 times on the ride in, and it hadn't changed a thing. The ranch needed horses. His needed horses. 2 went lame in the same week, and a man couldn't run cattle on promises. "You biddin' or sleepin', Cain?" Holt Dawson leaned against the fence post beside him, tobacco juice staining his chin. "Thinking," Silas said. "Dangerous habit." Silas ignored him. He watched the 2 geldings circle the ring, heads low, ribs showing, coats rough from poor feed. But their legs were clean, their eyes were clear. That was enough. "I'll start at $12, the auctioneer called. 12 for the pair. Come on now, gentlemen. Winter ain't buying your hay for ya." A hand went up near the front, then another. Silas waited. He'd learned patience from his father, and stubbornness from his mother. And between those 2 things, he'd survived more than most men his age. 14, someone called. 14.5. The bidding slowed. Men shook their heads. A rancher near the gate muttered something about grain prices and walked away. Silas raised his hand. 15 from the man in the back, the auctioneer said, pointing. $15. Do I hear 16? Silence. Going once. Holt nudged him. Steal of the century. Going twice. Silas kept his eyes forward. Sold. The gavel cracked down hard. The auctioneer grinned, wide, ugly, the kind of smile that meant something unpleasant was coming. He jerked his chin toward the far side of the ring. "And hell, take the woman too. Comes with the lot." Silas thought he'd misheard. Then the laughter started. It came from everywhere, rough, careless, the sound of men who'd forgotten what shame felt like. Someone whistled. Someone clapped. And beneath all of it, a smaller sound. Rope dragging across packed earth. Silas turned. She stood behind the horses, half hidden in their shadow. Her wrists were bound in front of her with rope so old it had darkened to the color of dried blood. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, stained with dirt and sweat, hanging off her frame like something borrowed from a scarecrow. Her feet were bare. Her hair fell tangled across her face, hiding everything but her mouth, which was pressed into a tight, bloodless line. She didn't move, didn't flinch, stood perfectly still, like a person who'd learned that stillness was the only armor left. "What the hell is this?" Silas said. The auctioneer shrugged. "Came in with the stock. Can't sell her separate. No papers, no name, no use. She don't talk. Don't work. Tried putting her in a kitchen. She just stood there. Worthless." A man near the rail laughed. "Dumber than the horses, I'd wager." More laughter. A voice from the back shouted something crude that made half the yard howl. Silas felt his jaw tighten so hard his teeth ached. "I didn't buy a woman," he said. "Didn't charge you for one either," the auctioneer replied. "Consider it a kindness. Take her or leave her. Makes no difference to me. "I'll take her," a voice cut in. Silas turned. A man 2 rails down pushed off the fence. Big, gut hanging over his belt, eyes fixed on the woman, with something that made Silas's stomach turn. The man's name was Virgil Creed, and Silas knew him the way everyone in the territory knew him. By reputation, and by the women who stopped appearing at socials after they'd been seen with him. "She ain't yours, Creed," the auctioneer said. "She went with Cain's lot. Cain don't want her. Look at him. He's about to refuse." Creed smiled, slow and sure. "I'll give you $2 for the trouble." The woman's fingers curled into fists at her sides. It was the only movement she'd made. Small, tight, controlled. The kind of thing most men wouldn't notice. Silas noticed. "Untie her," Silas said. The yard went quiet. Creed's smile faltered. "Now hold on. I said untie her." Silas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at the auctioneer and waited. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing between Silas and Creed, calculating something. Then he waved a hand. "Cut her loose." A boy stepped forward with a knife and sawed through the rope. It fell away in pieces. The woman's hands dropped to her sides, and she swayed, just once, before catching herself against the nearest horse. Her fingers wrapped into its mane, knuckles white. "This is foolish, Cain," Creed called after him. "You're taking home a problem you can't fix." Silas gathered the reins and walked toward the gate. He didn't answer. He didn't look back. Behind him, he heard the woman's bare feet on the packed dirt, following. They were a 1/4 mile down the road before he stopped. The dust had thinned. The noise of the auction yard had faded to nothing. Silas held the horses still and listened. Her breathing was steady, measured, not the ragged panting of someone about to collapse. He turned around. She stood 6 feet behind him, arms at her sides, head still lowered. Waiting. "You don't have to follow me," Silas said. Nothing. "I ain't your owner. I didn't buy you. You understand?" Silence. He studied her. Her hands, raw, scraped, torn at the nails, didn't match the rest of her. They were fine-boned, precise, the kind of hands that belonged to someone who'd held books, not plows. And her posture, even beaten down as she was, carried something straight and deliberate beneath the exhaustion. "Can you talk?" he asked. She didn't move. Silas sighed. "All right. I got a ranch about 4 hours east. There's a bunkhouse. You can stay the night, eat something, rest. Tomorrow you can go wherever you want. That fair?" For the first time, she lifted her head. Just enough. Her eyes met his through the tangle of dark hair. Sharp, dark, measuring. Not broken, not empty. Alert. Then she lowered her gaze again and took a step forward. Silas turned back to the road. "All right then." The walk was long and hot. Summer had come in mean that year, baking the ground hard, turning the grass yellow before June was over. The horses plodded along, tails flicking at flies. Silas kept his pace steady and fought the urge to look back every 10 steps. She didn't fall behind, not once. She matched the horses stride for stride, barefoot on cracked earth, and never made a sound. When they reached the ranch, squat house, weathered corral, barn leaning slightly east, Silas led the horses to water and pointed toward the bunkhouse. "Stove inside, water in the barrel by the door. I'll bring food." She walked past him without pausing, stepped inside, and closed the door. Not a slam, just a quiet, firm click, like a decision being made. Silas stood in the yard for a long moment, hat in his hand, staring at the closed door. Then he went to the house and put together a plate of bread, cold beans, and dried beef. He carried it back and set it on the bunkhouse step. He knocked once.
"Food's here."
No answer. He went back to the house, sat at his table, and tried to eat. Couldn't. His mind kept circling back to the auction yard. The laughter, the rope, the way Creed had looked at her, and the way she'd clenched her fists. That one small, furious gesture. A knock broke his thoughts. Silas pushed back from the table and opened the door. She stood on the porch, the empty plate in her hands. She held it out to him. "Thank you," he said, taking it. She turned to go. "Wait!" The word came out before he thought it through. She stopped, her back to him. "If you need anything tonight, blankets, more water, just knock." She looked over her shoulder, that same measuring look. Then she walked back to the bunkhouse, and the door clicked shut again. Silas washed the plate slowly, turning it over in his hands. She'd eaten every scrap, even licked the plate clean. He could tell by the way nothing clung to it. He woke before dawn. Habit, mostly. Ranching didn't care if you'd slept well. He pulled on his boots, splashed water on his face, and stepped outside. And stopped. The bunkhouse door was open. The woman was crouched beside the corral fence, her hands working a loose rail back into place. She'd found a hammer somewhere, his probably, from the toolbox in the barn, and was driving a nail with short, precise strikes. Silas walked over slowly. She didn't stop, didn't look up. Just finished the nail, tested the rail with both hands, and started on the next one. "That board's been loose since April," Silas said. She drove another nail, tested it, moved on. "You don't have to do that." She paused then, set the hammer down carefully, and for the first time, she spoke. "The bottom hinge on your barn door is rusted through. It'll break within the week." Silas's chest seized. Her voice was clear, steady, educated, the kind of speech that came from schoolrooms and parlors, not frontier kitchens. "You talk," he said, and immediately felt stupid for saying it. "Yes." "They said you couldn't." "They said a lot of things." She picked up the hammer again. "Most of it was wrong." Silas lowered himself to a crouch beside her, slow, keeping distance. "You let them believe it. At the auction. You stood there and let every man in that yard think that I was worthless." She looked at him now, full on, no hair hiding her face. Her eyes were dark brown, steady, and older than her years. "A woman who can't speak, can't work, can't think. What use is she to men like that?" "None." "Exactly. And a woman with no use gets ignored, overlooked, forgotten." She turned back to the fence. "That's how I survived." Silas sat there, processing it. The silence at the auction. The stillness. The way she'd let them laugh without flinching. It wasn't weakness. It was strategy. "What's your name?" he asked. She set the hammer down again. Her fingers pressed flat against the rail, and he watched something shift behind her eyes. A calculation. A decision. "Ruth," she said. "Ruth Calloway." "Silas Cain," he tipped his hat. "My ranch, such as it is." "I know. Your name's on the mailbox." A flicker of something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but close. "It's a good ranch. Needs work, but the bones are solid." Silas huffed. "You an expert on ranches now?" "No, but I know land. I know what good soil looks like, and what happens when men steal it." The way she said it, steal, carried weight. Old weight. Personal weight. "Who stole your land, Ruth?" She didn't answer right away. She stood up, brushed dirt from her knees, and looked out across the property. Her jaw was set, her shoulders squared. "My family didn't own land," she said carefully. "They took other people's. There's a difference." Silas stood up too. "Took it how?" "Legally, which is the cruelest way. Surveys redrawn, titles challenged, judges paid. By the time the real owners understood what was happening, they were already gone." She turned to face him. "My father is a man named Harlan Mercer." The name hit Silas like a fist. Mercer. He'd seen that name on documents, in newspapers, on the foreclosure notice that had taken his father's south pasture 8 years ago. Mercer Land and Rail, the company that swallowed small ranches the way rivers swallowed stones. Slowly, completely, without apology. "Mercer," Silas repeated, his voice flattened to nothing. "Yes. Harlan Mercer is your father. He was, until I became inconvenient." Ruth held his gaze without flinching. "I found letters, contracts, proof of what he'd done. Not just the land grabs, but the bribes, the threats, the families he destroyed. I copied everything I could. And when he found out..." She stopped, swallowed hard. "He didn't kill me. Killing a daughter raises questions. Selling one to a cattle driver heading west, that just makes her disappear." Silas's hands had balled into fists without him realizing it. He forced them open. "How long?" 7 months. I was passed from camp to camp, traded for supplies, labor, whatever they needed." Her voice stayed level, but her hands shook, just once, just briefly. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "The auction was the last stop. They expected me to die there or end up with someone like Creed. Either way, erased." "But you didn't." "No. You said, untie her, and I still don't know why." Silas looked at her, really looked, at the bruises fading on her arms, at the way she held herself upright despite everything, at the intelligence in her eyes that no amount of suffering had managed to dim. "Because I watched my mother stand in a yard just like that one," he said quietly. Different circumstances, same look in her eyes, and nobody said a damn word. Ruth was quiet for a long time. "Your mother," she said. "What happened to her?" "She held this ranch together after my father lost half of it. Worked herself to bone. Died at 42 with calluses so thick she couldn't close her hands." He paused. "Mercer Land and Rail took the south pasture. That's what started the unraveling." Ruth closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright. Not with tears, with fury. "Then I owe you more than safety," she said. "I owe you the truth about what they did. And I can prove it." "Prove it how?" "The documents I copied. I didn't leave them behind. I memorized them. Every name, every figure, every parcel number. 7 months of being treated like livestock gives you time to engrave things in your mind that no one can take away." Silas stared at her. "You remember all of it?" "Every word." He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, put it back on. "Ruth, if what you're saying is true, there are men who'll kill to keep it quiet." "I know. That's why I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." She stepped closer. "Do you want me to leave? Because if I stay, trouble comes with me. Real trouble. The kind with badges and guns and legal authority that no amount of fencing will keep out." Silas looked at his ranch, the crooked corral, the leaning barn, the house his mother had died in. He thought about what it had cost his family. Not in money, but in years, in grief, in the slow, crushing weight of injustice that nobody bothered to name. "You fixed my fence," he said. Ruth blinked. "What?" "You've been here one night. You fixed a rail that's been broken for months. You know my barn door is about to fail. And you just told me you can recite from memory the documents that prove the most powerful man in this territory is a thief." He settled his hat. "Lady, I ain't sending you anywhere." Something broke open in her face. Not tears, not gratitude, but relief. The kind so deep it looked like pain. "They'll come," she whispered. "Let them." "Silas, I've been losing to men like your father my whole life. Lost land, lost cattle, lost my mother to work that shouldn't have been hers to carry. If there's a chance to stop even one of them, I don't care what it costs." Ruth held his gaze for a long, still moment. Then she nodded, once, firm, the same way she'd driven that nail into his fence. "Then we have work to do," she said, "and we start with your ledgers." That evening, Silas spread his ranch records across the kitchen table. Years of cramped handwriting, receipts, tax notices, payments to the rail company. Ruth sat across from him, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and went through them with a focus that bordered on frightening. "Here," she said, tapping a line. "You're paying a spur fee to Mercer Rail for crossing their land. But this section," she traced the boundary on a rough map he'd sketched years ago. "This isn't their land. The original survey puts the public right-of-way 30 yards north. They moved the marker." Silas leaned in. "You're sure?" "I've seen the original filed survey. I copied the coordinates myself. Your father was paying for access to land that was already public." The anger came slowly, like heat building under a closed lid. "How much?" he asked. "Over 8 years? At the rates they charged?" Ruth did the math in her head. "Close to $400. $400. Enough to have saved the South pasture. Enough to have kept his mother from working herself into an early grave." "Son of a bitch," Silas whispered. "There's more. Your water rights. The creek that feeds your eastern pasture. Mercer filed a diversion claim on it 2 years ago. If it goes through, they can legally redirect your water supply." "They can't do that." "They can if no one challenges it. And they're counting on no one challenging it." Ruth looked up. "That's how they work, Silas. They don't take everything at once. They take it piece by piece, slow enough that by the time you notice, it's too late to fight." Silas pushed back from the table and stood. He walked to the window, hands braced on the frame, staring out at the darkening land. His land. What was left of it. "My father knew," he said. "Before he died, he said something. I thought he was rambling. They move the lines, son. Don't let 'em move the lines." I didn't understand. "He knew," Ruth said quietly. "He just didn't have the proof." Silas turned around. "And you do." "In my head. Every line, every number. But memory won't hold up in a hearing. We need physical copies. And to get those, we'd have to reach the Territorial Records Office in Helena." "That's a 4-day ride." "I know. Through Mercer territory." "I know that too." They looked at each other across the table. Two people with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The lamplight threw long shadows across the walls. Outside, the summer heat was finally breaking, evening air pouring through the open windows like a held breath releasing. "We ain't riding anywhere tonight," Silas said. "But tomorrow, we plan." Ruth gathered the papers carefully, stacking them with the precision of someone who understood that documents were weapons. "Tomorrow," she agreed. She rose from the table and moved toward the door. Paused. "Silas?" "Yeah?" "At the auction, When you told them to untie me, you didn't know any of this. You didn't know about Mercer, about the documents, about any of it. No. Then why? He was quiet for a moment. Because nobody should be thrown in free with the livestock, Ruth. That's not a complicated idea. She held his gaze. Something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but the beginning of something that would prove harder to break than rope or chain. No, she said softly. It isn't. The door closed behind her. Silas sat back down at the table, alone with his father's ledgers and his mother's ghost, and the slow, burning certainty that everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change. Outside, Ruth Calloway sat on the bunkhouse step, face tilted toward the summer sky, and for the first time in 7 months, she breathed without counting the cost. She was not safe, she knew that, but she was no longer alone. And for a woman who'd been erased from the world, that was enough to start. Ruth was already at the corral when Silas came out at first light. She had both geldings brushed down and was checking their hooves, lifting each one with a confidence that said she'd done it before. "You know horses," Silas said. "I know a lot of things men don't expect me to know." She set the hoof down and straightened. "We need to talk about Helena. I've been thinking on it. And? 4 days through open country. Mercer's got riders between here and there. If they're already looking for you, they are, then we can't just ride the main road like Sunday churchgoers." Ruth wiped her hands on her skirt. "There's a back route, through the Bitterroot Pass, then north along the river. Adds a day, but it avoids every Mercer checkpoint I know of." Silas frowned. "How do you know they're checkpoints?" "Because I spent 7 months being moved through them." Her voice didn't waver. "I know where they post men. I know the rotation. I know which ones drink on duty and which ones don't." He studied her face. No bravado, no performance, just the hard-earned knowledge of someone who'd survived by paying attention when no one thought she was capable of it. "We'll need supplies," he said. "I've got enough for maybe 3 days if we stretch it." "Then we don't stretch it. We move fast and light." Ruth crossed her arms. "But there's a problem we haven't discussed." "Just one?" "Your neighbor, Holt Dawson. He was at the auction. He saw you take me. How well do you trust him?" Silas hesitated. Holt had been his neighbor for 6 years. They'd shared fences, traded labor during roundup, split a bottle of whiskey on more than a few cold nights. But trust was a word that meant different things depending on what it cost. "He's a decent man," Silas said carefully. "Decent men talk, Silas, especially when someone offers them a reason to." Before he could answer, the sound of hooves reached them from the road. Both of them turned. A single rider crested the hill, moving at an easy pace. No urgency, no threat. Silas recognized the slouch in the saddle before he saw the face. Holt Dawson reined up at the gate and tipped his hat. "Morning, Cain." "Holt." Holt's eyes slid past Silas to Ruth, who stood motionless by the corral. He looked at her for a long moment, then looked back at Silas with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual. "Heard you got yourself a bargain at the auction yesterday." "I bought 2 horses." "That ain't all you brought home. Whole town's talking." Holt dismounted and looped his reins over the fence post. "Virgil Creed's been running his mouth at the saloon. Says you stole his property." Ruth's jaw tightened. Silas saw it and stepped forward, putting himself between her and Holt without making it obvious. "She ain't property," Silas said. "Not mine, not Creed's, not anyone's." Holt raised his hands. "Easy, friend. I ain't here to argue. I came to warn you." He lowered his voice. "Creed rode out to the telegraph office last night, sent a wire. I don't know who to, but the clerk said it was long, and it mentioned a woman. Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. He glanced at Ruth. Her face had gone still, that same controlled blankness he'd seen at the auction. "How do you know what the clerk said?" Silas asked. "Because the clerk is my wife's cousin, and he talks too much when he drinks, which is always." Holt looked at Ruth again. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are or where you come from, but if Virgil Creed is sending wires about you, it ain't because he's concerned for your welfare." Ruth stepped forward. "What exactly did the wire say?" "Just that a woman matching a certain description turned up at auction and went home with Silas Cain, and that she might be worth something to the right people." "Worth something," Ruth repeated. The words came out like a blade drawn slow from a sheath. "His words, not mine." Holt turned back to Silas. "I don't know what you've gotten into, Cain, but I've known you long enough to say this straight. Whatever it is, get ahead of it, before it gets ahead of you." He mounted up without waiting for a response, touched the brim of his hat, and rode back the way he came. Silas and Ruth stood in silence until the hoofbeats faded. "We don't have 4 days," Ruth said quietly. "We might not have 2. "I know. If Creed wired Mercer's people, they'll send riders, fast ones. They could be here by tomorrow night." Silas turned to her. "Then we leave today." "The horses aren't rested." "They'll rest on the trail. Pack what we need. I'll saddle up." Ruth didn't argue. She moved toward the bunkhouse with purpose, gathering the few things she'd need. Silas went to the barn and pulled down saddles, checking cinches, filling canteens. His hands moved fast, but his mind moved faster, running through every mile between his ranch and Helena, calculating risk the way his father had once calculated the cost of losing. They were mounted within the hour. Silas took one last look at the ranch, the house, the corral, the barn with its rusted hinge that Ruth had noticed before he did. He wondered if he'd see it again. "Silas!" Ruth's voice pulled him back. She sat her horse steady, spine straight, eyes forward. "Don't look back. It slows you down." He turned his horse toward the hills. "Speaking from experience?" 7 months of it." They rode hard through the morning, keeping to the low ground, following creek beds and tree lines. Ruth navigated without hesitation, calling out turns and landmarks with the certainty of someone reading a map she'd memorized. "There's a crossing 1/2 mile ahead," she said around midday. "Mercer posts a man there during cattle season, but he pulls out by June." "It's July." "Exactly." They reached the crossing, a shallow ford where the river ran wide and slow, empty. Ruth had been right. They pushed through, water splashing up past the horses' knees, and climbed the far bank without stopping. It was past noon when Ruth pulled up short. Silas reined in beside her. "What?" She pointed toward the ridge to the east. A thin column of dust rose against the blue sky, the kind kicked up by horses moving at speed. "How many?" Silas asked. Ruth shaded her eyes. "At least 3, maybe 4. "Could be anybody." "Could be, but they're coming from the direction of town, and they're moving fast on a day when sensible men stay out of the heat." She looked at him. "That's not anybody, Silas. That's intent." He didn't waste time debating it. "The ravine, 1/4 mile south. We cut through and come out on the other side before they crest that ridge." They spurred the horses and rode hard, the ravine swallowing them in shadow and loose rock. The footing was treacherous. Silas's gelding stumbled twice, but Ruth kept her horse steady, guiding it with her knees and a firm hand, and they emerged on the far slope just as the dust column on the ridge shifted direction. "They're tracking us," Ruth said. There was no panic in her voice, only assessment. "Off the trail then. We go cross-country." "That adds another day." "Better than the alternative." Ruth nodded. They turned west, away from the road, away from everything predictable, and pushed into country that hadn't seen a trail in years. By late afternoon, they'd put enough distance behind them that Silas allowed himself to breathe. They stopped in a hollow where a spring fed a small pool and let the horses drink. Ruth dismounted and knelt by the water. She cupped her hands, drank, and sat back on her heels. "You need to know something," she said. "More bad news?" "Context." She turned to face him. "My father didn't just take land, Silas. He killed for it." Not directly. He'd never dirty his own hands. But there were ranchers who fought back, families who refused to sell. They had accidents, fires, stampedes that came from nowhere. She paused. "Your father's south pasture, the one Mercer took. Do you know how the foreclosure started?" Silas's throat tightened. "Missed payments. 3 in a row. Bank called the note." "And why did he miss those payments?" "Cattle died. Bad water in the creek that winter. 40 head, gone in a week." Ruth's eyes held his. "The water wasn't bad by accident. Mercer's men poisoned the upstream feed. I've seen the order. It was written in my father's hand." The world tilted. Silas grabbed the saddle horn to steady himself, though he was already on the ground. His father's face flashed through his mind. The confusion, the grief, the slow surrender of a man who couldn't understand why everything kept going wrong. "He didn't just lose the land," Silas said. His voice scraped raw. "He lost himself after that. Stopped eating. Stopped talking. Died that spring like he'd just given up." "I know," Ruth whispered. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry my blood did that to your family." "Don't." The word came out harder than he intended. "Don't apologize for him. You're not him." "I carry his name." "You carry his evidence. There's a difference." Silas straightened. The grief was there, hot, enormous, threatening to swallow him whole. But beneath it, something harder was forming. Something with edges. "Those documents in your head, the ones that prove what he did, can they bring him down? If we get them entered into the territorial record before he can suppress them? Yes. His whole operation collapses. Every fraudulent survey, every bribed judge, every stolen acre, it all unravels. Then we ride faster." Ruth stood and put her hand on his arm. It was the first time she'd touched him. Her grip was firm, her fingers still rough from 7 months of being someone's labor. "Silas, if we do this, if we make it to Helena and file those records, he won't just send riders. He'll send killers. And he won't just come after me. He'll come after you, your ranch, everything you have." "I don't have much." "You have land. You have a name. You have a life." "I have a life built on a lie. My father died because your father poisoned his cattle, and I've been paying rent to the men who did it." He covered her hand with his. "I'm already in this, Ruth. I was in it before I ever met you. I just didn't know it." She held his gaze for a long, searching moment. Whatever she found there seemed to settle something inside her, because she nodded once, that same firm, decisive nod, and released his arm. "There's a homestead at the base of the Bitterroot," she said, all business again. "Belongs to a woman named Ida Polk. She sheltered me once, weeks ago, when I was being moved between camps. She didn't ask questions then. She might help again." "You trust her?" "She fed me when I had nothing to offer in return. In my experience, that's the most trustworthy thing a person can do." They mounted up and rode until the light started to fail. Ruth led them along the base of the foothills, following water where she could find it, reading the land with an ease that surprised him. "You ride well for a woman who grew up in parlors," Silas said. "I grew up watching my father take land from men on horseback. I learned to ride so I could understand what he was stealing." She glanced sideways at him. And I rode every chance I got because it was the only time I felt free. They made camp in a stand of cottonwood. No fire, Ruth insisted. Too visible, she said. They sat in the growing dark, eating jerky and hardtack, backs against their saddles. Tell me about your mother, Ruth said. Silas chewed slowly. Margaret Cain, toughest woman I ever knew. Could shoe a horse, birth a calf, and balance a ledger all before noon. When my father started failing, she took over everything. Ran the ranch, raised me, fought the bank, fought Mercer's lawyers, fought everyone, and lost. She didn't lose. She ran out of time. His voice roughened. 42 years old. Hands so torn up she couldn't button her own dress at the end. Doc said it was her heart, but I know what killed her. It was the weight. All that weight and nobody to share it with. Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, My mother died when I was 12. Fever. My father never spoke of her again. Not once. It was like she'd never existed. Is that when he changed? He didn't change. He just stopped pretending. She pulled her shawl tighter. I think he was always what he was. She was just the only thing that made him careful about showing it. And when she was gone, he became what he wanted to be, and I became the only witness. Ruth's voice dropped. That's the real reason he got rid of me, Silas. Not because I stole documents, because I remembered my mother. And every time he looked at me, he saw someone who knew what he used to pretend to be. Silas let the silence hold. Some things didn't need a response. They needed space. After a while, Ruth lay back against her saddle and closed her eyes. We should sleep. Tomorrow we reach the Bitterroot, and after that, there's no easy ground until Helena. I'll keep first watch. Wake me in 4 hours. And Silas? Yeah? If you hear riders in the night, don't wait for them to get close. Wake me and we run. No heroics. I ain't the hero type. She opened one eye. You untied a woman at an auction full of armed men who were laughing at her. You're exactly the hero type. You just don't know it yet. She closed her eye. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. Not the deep sleep of someone who felt safe, but the measured rest of someone who'd trained herself to sleep in enemy territory. Silas sat in the dark, rifle across his knees, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. He thought about his father, dying in the back bedroom with confusion in his eyes. He thought about his mother, her ruined hands folded across her chest in the pine box he built himself. He thought about Ruth, sold, silenced, erased, and the fire that still burned behind her eyes despite all of it. $400. That's what Mercer had stolen from his family in fraudulent spur fees alone. And that was just the money. The real cost couldn't be counted in dollars. It was counted in years, in graves, in a son who grew up believing his father had simply failed, when the truth was that his father had been murdered slowly, legally, by men in clean boots who never got dirt under their fingernails. Something shifted inside Silas Cain in that darkness. Not rage. Rage burned hot and died fast. This was colder, deeper. The kind of resolve that settled into bone and stayed there. He'd spent his whole life believing that losing was just what men like him did. That the world belonged to the Mercers, and the best you could hope for was to hold on to what little they hadn't taken yet. Ruth Calloway had shown him, in the space of 2 days, that the only reason men like Mercer won was because men like Silas didn't know they were being cheated. That was over now. He watched the dark hills and listened to Ruth breathe and waited for dawn with the patience of a man who finally understood exactly what he was fighting for. 3 hours before sunrise, a coyote screamed somewhere in the distance. Ruth's eyes snapped open instantly, alert, focused, no confusion. "Coyote," Silas said. "I know," she sat up. "But I heard something else. Before it. Hooves on shale." Silas held his breath and listened. Nothing. Then, faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. Horses on hard ground. Moving slow, but moving steady. "How far?" he whispered. Ruth tilted her head, calculating. "Mile, maybe less. They're picking their way through the dark. They don't know exactly where we are, but they know the direction. Creed's wire. Mercer's men. Creed wouldn't ride at night. He's a coward. These are professionals." She was already on her feet, rolling her blanket, tightening her saddle cinch with quick, silent hands. "We go now. No trail. Straight through the brush toward the river. They won't follow in the dark. Too much risk of laming a horse." Silas packed in silence, every movement deliberate. They led the horses by hand through the brush, slow and careful, until the ground softened near the river. Then they mounted and let the water cover their tracks, riding upstream for a quarter-mile before cutting back to solid ground on the far bank. Behind them, the sound of hooves had stopped. Whoever was following had lost the trail, for now. Ruth guided them through the pre-dawn dark with a certainty that bordered on unnatural. Every turn, every slope, every obstacle, she navigated as if the land were lit by a lamp only she could see. "How do you know this country so well?" Silas asked, keeping his voice low. "Because the men who moved me through it thought I was sleeping, or stupid, or both." Ruth's voice carried something almost like satisfaction. "They talked openly around me. Landmarks, routes, supply caches. They treated me like furniture, and furniture hears everything." Dawn found them 3 miles ahead of where they'd camped, climbing into the Bitterroot foothills. The air was cooler here, thin and sharp. Ruth pointed toward a thin column of chimney smoke rising between the hills. "Ida Polk," she said, "if she's still there." Silas checked his rifle and loosened it in the scabbard. "And if she's not?" Ruth's jaw set. "Then we keep riding and don't stop until Helena." They approached the homestead slow, single file, Silas in front. The place was small. A cabin, a chicken coop, a garden with stakes in the ground. A dog barked twice and went quiet. The door opened before they reached the fence. A woman stepped out. 60, maybe older, with iron-gray hair braided down her back and a shotgun resting easy in the crook of her arm. She looked at Silas first, measuring him the way women in hard country measured strange men. Quickly, thoroughly, with a finger near the trigger. Then she looked past him to Ruth. Her face changed. Not a smile, something deeper. Recognition. Remembrance. "Well," Ida Polk said, "you're still alive." Ruth dismounted. "Barely." "Barely counts." Ida lowered the shotgun. "Come inside, both of you, and bring those horses around back where they can't be seen from the road." Ida Polk set tin cups of coffee on the table and sat down across from them with the shotgun laid flat beside her plate, like it belonged there. She looked at Ruth the way a woman looks at a wound she expected to find open, but hoped had closed. "Last time I saw you, you were half dead in my chicken coop," Ida said. "2 men came looking for you the next morning. I told them I hadn't seen a soul." "I know," Ruth said. "I heard you through the wall." "And you didn't make a sound, not one." Ida shook her head. "I've been praying you were alive somewhere. Didn't much believe it, though." "I almost wasn't." Ruth wrapped her hands around the cup. "Ida, we're headed for Helena, the Territorial Records Office. I need to file what I know before my father's people catch up." Ida's eyes narrowed. "How close behind you?" "We heard riders last night," Silas said. "Mile out, maybe less. Lost them at the river, but that won't hold long. It won't hold at all. You know who they sent? Ida looked at Ruth. Wade Pruitt. The name landed like a slap. Ruth's hands went still around her cup. Silas saw the color drain from her face. The first time he'd seen fear crack through her composure. "You're sure?" Ruth asked. "He came through here 3 days ago, asked about a woman, described you down to the scar on your left hand." Ida nodded toward Ruth's hand, where a thin white line ran from her thumb to her wrist. "I played dumb, but he'll be back. Men like Pruitt always come back." Silas leaned forward. "Who's Pruitt?" Ruth set down her cup. "My father's fixer. Not a hired gun. Something worse. He was a U.S. Marshal. Legitimate badge. Legitimate authority. My father got him reassigned to the territory 5 years ago. He handles problems that need to disappear legally. Meaning he can arrest you. Meaning he can arrest anyone. And once you're in his custody, you don't come back out." Ruth's voice had gone flat. "He killed a rancher named Tom Sutter 2 years ago. Shot him during a so-called prisoner transport. Called it an escape attempt. No investigation, no questions." Silas sat back. "So we're running from a lawman. We're running from a killer with a badge. There's a difference, and it matters. Because when we get to Helena, no one will believe us over him unless we have those records in hand." Ida stood up and went to the window. She looked out for a long time, then turned back. "You've got maybe 8 hours before he picks up your trail again. The river bought you time, not distance." "Can we make Helena in 8 hours?" Silas asked Ruth. "Not on tired horses. Not through the pass." Ida crossed her arms. "There's another way. My late husband used to run freight through the Bitterroot before Mercer shut down the Independence. There's a logging road, abandoned now, that cuts through the north side of the range. Comes out above Helena, maybe 6 miles from town. It's rough, but it's fast, and nobody uses it anymore." "Nobody uses it because it's a death trap in the dark," Ruth said. "You won't be in the dark. You'll be in broad daylight if you leave now." Ida walked to a shelf and pulled down a folded piece of canvas. She spread it on the table, a hand-drawn map, creased and stained, with routes marked in faded ink. "My husband drew this. Every turn, every washout, every place where the road narrows. I've kept it because I knew someday someone would need it." Ruth studied the map, tracing routes with her finger. "This cuts a full day off the ride." "Day and a half if you push it." Silas looked at the map, then at Ida. "Why are you helping us?" Ida met his eyes without blinking. "Because Harlan Mercer took my husband's freight business and gave him a choice. Sell for pennies or lose everything. He sold. Then he drank himself to death in 2 years." She paused. "I've been waiting a long time for someone to fight back. Didn't expect it to be his own daughter." Ruth folded the map carefully. "Ida, when Pruitt comes through here again, let me worry about Pruitt. I've been lying to powerful men since before you were born, girl. I'm good at it." Ida reached under the table and pulled out a canvas sack. "Dried meat, biscuits, 2 canteens. That'll get you to Helena if you don't stop." Ruth stood and took the sack. For a moment, the two women looked at each other. No words, no embrace, just a shared understanding that passed between them like a current. "Thank you," Ruth said. "Don't thank me. Win." Ida picked up her shotgun. "Now get off my land before you bring trouble to my door." They rode out the back of Ida's property and found the logging road within the hour. It was narrow and overgrown, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast, but the footing was solid and the grade was steady. Ruth held the map open against her saddle horn and called directions without hesitation. "Fork ahead, go left. The right branch dead ends at an old mill.
How's the map holding up?
Better than we are. Ruth glanced at him. When's the last time you ate something? Whenever you did. That's not an answer. Silas reached into the sack and tore off a piece of jerky. Happy? Ecstatic. She took a piece for herself. Silas, we need to talk about what happens when we get to Helena. I figured we walk into the records office and start filing. It's not that simple. The territorial clerk is appointed by the governor. The governor owes favors to half the men my father owns. If Pruitt gets word to Helena before we do, that office will be closed to us. Then we get there first. And if we can't? If the clerk refuses to accept the filing? Silas chewed slowly. You said you memorized everything. Every document, every number. I did. Can you write it out? All of it? From memory? Given enough time, yes. Then we don't need the clerk to accept anything. We need a witness. Someone with standing who can verify what you write down and swear to it. Ruth turned in her saddle to look at him fully. That's actually a good idea. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm impressed. There's a difference. She thought for a moment. There's a federal judge in Helena, Samuel Craddock. He's not connected to Mercer. He was appointed from Washington, and he's made enemies locally because he won't play along. If we can get to him directly... A federal judge will see us? He'll see me. When I tell him my name and what I'm carrying in my head, he'll see me. Ruth's voice hardened. My father has spent 20 years building an empire on stolen ground. One honest judge is all it takes to start pulling it apart. They pushed on. The logging road climbed steadily, winding through cuts in the hillside. The horses were tired but willing, and Ruth kept them moving with a steady hand. It was mid-afternoon when Silas heard it. A gunshot. Single, sharp, echoing off the hills behind them. Both horses spooked. Silas grabbed his reins tight and steadied the gelding. Ruth did the same.
Signal shot, she said. They found our trail.
How far?
That echo. 2 miles, maybe 3. But they know the direction now.
Can we outrun them?
On fresh horses, yes. On these?
Ruth looked at the lathered necks of their mounts. We have to try. They kicked into a canter, the logging road blurring beneath them. Ruth rode low over her horse's neck, the map clutched in one hand, calling out turns as they came.
Left at the split rock. Bridge ahead, walk the horses across, the boards are rotted. Hard right after the creek. Don't miss it or we drop into a ravine.
Silas followed her every command without question. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew, faint at first, then steady, the drumming of multiple horses on hard ground. Another gunshot. Closer. That's not a signal, Silas said. That's a warning.
They want us to stop. If they wanted us dead, they'd save the ammunition.
Comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to keep you alive. Ruth pulled up sharply. The road forked. She stared at the map, then at the terrain, then back at the map. Ruth.
I know. Give me a second.
We don't have a second.
Left.
She kicked her horse forward.
Left, and then straight for 2 miles. The road drops down to the valley floor. Once we're in the open, we run flat out for Helena.
They took the left fork at speed. The road narrowed, the hillside pressing in on both sides. Silas's horse stumbled on loose rock, but recovered. Behind them, the hoofbeats were louder now. Organized. Relentless. The road dropped suddenly, spilling them out onto flat ground. Ahead, in the distance, Silas could see buildings. A church steeple. Rooftops catching the afternoon light.
Helena,
Ruth breathed. How far?
4 miles, maybe 5.
We can make it.
Silas,
Ruth's voice changed. He looked at her. She was staring not ahead, but to the right, where the main road curved in from the south. 3 riders had emerged from the tree line and were positioned across the road between them and town. They sat motionless, waiting. The man in the center wore a marshal's badge that caught the sun. "Pruitt," Ruth said. Silas's hand went to his rifle. Ruth grabbed his arm. "Don't. He's legitimate law. You draw on a U.S. Marshal, you hang. That's exactly what he wants." "Then what do we do?" Ruth didn't answer immediately. She looked behind them. The riders from the hills were gaining, a quarter-mile back at most. She looked ahead, Pruitt and his men, blocking the road. "We ride straight at him," she said. "Are you out of your mind? He won't shoot us in the open. Not this close to town. Too many witnesses. He needs to take us quietly, arrest us, transport us, make us disappear on the road." She turned to Silas with fierce certainty. "But he can't arrest us if we're already in the custody of someone with higher authority. Craddock, the federal judge. His office is at the far end of Main Street. If we can get past Pruitt and reach Craddock before Pruitt can stop us, that's a lot of ifs, Ruth. It's all we've got." Silas looked at Pruitt, sitting his horse with the calm patience of a man who'd done this many times before. Then he looked at Ruth, bruised, exhausted, riding a horse that was about to give out, carrying nothing but the contents of her mind and the stubborn refusal to be erased. "All right," he said. "Stay behind me. When I say go, you ride for town and don't stop for anything." "Silas." "Anything, Ruth. Not for me, not for gunshots, not for God himself. You get to that judge's office and you start talking. Promise me." Her eyes glistened. "I promise." Silas settled his hat, loosened his rifle in its scabbard, and nudged his horse forward. "Walk first, then trot, then canter." Pruitt raised a hand. "That's far enough, Cain." Silas kept coming. "I said stop. I'm a United States Marshal, and I'm ordering you to halt." Silas reined in 50 yards from the line. Close enough to see Pruitt's face. Sharp, clean-shaven, eyes the color of riverstone. The kind of face that inspired trust in people who didn't know better. "Marshal," Silas said, "what's the trouble?" "No trouble. I'm looking for a woman. Ruth Mercer. Wanted for theft of private documents and property destruction. I have reason to believe she's traveling with you." "Don't know any Ruth Mercer." "Don't play games, Cain. I know who she is. I know what she took. And I know you're harboring a fugitive, which makes you an accessory." Silas felt Ruth behind him, heard her horse shift. He kept his eyes on Pruitt. "You got a warrant?" Pruitt smiled. It was the smile of a man who is used to winning. "I don't need one. Territorial authority grants me." "I asked if you have a warrant, Marshal." "A piece of paper with a judge's name on it. Do you or don't you?" The smile thinned. "I'm giving you one chance, Cain. Hand over the woman and ride home. You'll never hear from me again." "And if I don't?" "Then you'll wish you had." Pruitt's hand rested on his sidearm. Not gripping, just resting. A reminder. Behind them, the riders from the hills had reached the valley floor. Silas could hear them closing in. 5 minutes, maybe less, before they were boxed in completely. "Ruth," Silas said, without turning around. "Go." "Silas?" "Now." She kicked her horse. The gelding lunged forward, veering wide around Pruitt's line, heading for the gap between 2 of his men. Pruitt shouted. One of his riders moved to cut her off. Silas spurred his horse directly at Pruitt. The marshal's horse reared. Pruitt swore and fought for control. His men wheeled, confused, one chasing Ruth, one trying to help Pruitt. The formation shattered. Ruth's horse found the gap. She was through, racing toward town at a dead gallop, bent low over the horse's neck. Pruitt got his horse under control and drew his pistol. "Stop, or I fire!" "Go ahead, Marshal," Silas said, putting himself between Pruitt's gun and Ruth's retreating back. "Shoot an unarmed rancher in front of the whole valley. See how that warrant works out for you." Pruitt's jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped. He aimed past Silas at Ruth's shrinking figure, then lowered the gun. "You're a dead man, Cain." "Maybe, but she's gone." Pruitt's men regrouped. One grabbed Silas's reins, another pulled his rifle from the scabbard. Pruitt rode up close enough that Silas could smell the pomade in his hair. "Where is she going?" Silas said nothing. Pruitt struck him across the face with the barrel of his pistol. Pain exploded through Silas's cheekbone. He tasted blood. "I asked you a question, and I gave you an answer." Pruitt hit him again. Stars burst behind Silas's eyes. He gripped the saddle horn to keep from falling. "You think this is brave?" Pruitt said. "You think you're some kind of hero? I've put better men than you in the ground, Cain. Legally. Quietly. Nobody asked questions, and nobody mourned." Silas spat blood. "My father was one of those men. You remember him? South pasture, 8 years ago. Cattle poisoned. Land foreclosed. Man dead within the year." Something flickered in Pruitt's eyes. Recognition, or something close to it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yeah, you do. And so does the woman riding toward Helena right now with every dirty detail your boss ever committed burned into her memory." Silas smiled through the blood. "You can beat me all day, Marshal. Won't change what she knows." Pruitt stared at him. Then he turned to his men. "Leave him. He's nothing." He wheeled his horse toward town. "Ride! Cut her off before she reaches Main Street." The 3 men spurred their horses and thundered toward Helena. Silas sat alone in the road, blood running down his chin, one eye swelling shut, watching them go. He waited until they were small in the distance. Then he bent forward, gripped his horse's mane, and followed. Slow, steady, hurting with every stride. Ruth had a head start, maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. But she was riding a dying horse toward a town she'd never been to, looking for a judge she'd never met. And behind her came 3 armed men with legal authority to stop her. 2 minutes. That was all he'd bought her. He prayed it was enough. Ruth hit the outskirts of Helena at a gallop. People scattered. A woman screamed. A dog bolted across the road. Ruth pulled her horse between buildings, cutting through an alley, emerging onto what had to be Main Street. She scanned the storefronts: general store, bank, saloon, hotel. Her eyes raced over every sign, every shingle. There, at the far end of the street, a 2-story building with a brass plate beside the door. She couldn't read it from this distance, but she didn't need to. Ida's husband's map had included landmarks in town, and Ruth had memorized those too. She kicked her horse forward. The gelding was staggering now, foam streaking its neck, but it ran. It ran because she asked it to, and because some creatures will give everything they have when the hand on the rein is steady and the need is real. Behind her, hooves on the street. Pruitt's men. "Stop that woman!" Pruitt's voice, carrying over the noise of the town. "Federal authority! Stop her!" People turned. Some moved to obey. A man stepped into the street with his arms raised. Ruth went around him. The horse nearly clipped a wagon. She held on, knees locked, hands white on the reins. 50 yards. 30. 20. She pulled the horse to a sliding stop at the building's steps, threw herself from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped, and ran up the stairs. The door was locked. Ruth pounded on it. "Judge Craddock." "My name is Ruth Mercer. I have evidence of territorial fraud. Open the door. Nothing. She pounded again. Pruitt's horse rounded the corner at the end of the street. "Judge Craddock!" Ruth's voice cracked. She hit the door with both fists. "Please, they're coming!" A lock turned. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway, 60, white-haired, spectacles, wearing a vest and shirt sleeves. He looked at Ruth, wild-eyed, filthy, barefoot, breathing like a hunted animal. "Who are you?" he said.
"Ruth Mercer, Harlan Mercer's daughter. I have evidence that will bring down every fraudulent land claim in this territory, and there's a man with a badge coming up the street right now to kill me before I can tell you what I know."
Judge Samuel Craddock looked past her, saw Pruitt dismounting, hand on his gun, moving fast. "Come inside," the judge said. Ruth stepped through the door. Craddock closed it behind her, turned the lock, and slid a heavy bolt into place. Pruitt hit the door 10 seconds later. "Open up, Judge. Federal business." Craddock didn't move from where he stood. He looked at Ruth, then at the door, then back at Ruth. "Federal business," he repeated quietly. "Is that what we're calling it now?" He walked to his desk, sat down, and folded his hands. "Start from the beginning, Miss Mercer, and don't leave anything out." Ruth sank into the chair across from him. Her hands were shaking. Her horse was dying in the street. Somewhere out on the road, a man with blood on his face was riding toward her with everything he had left. She opened her mouth and began to talk. Outside, Wade Pruitt pounded on the door again, and again, and again. But the lock held, and the judge didn't answer, and for the first time in 20 years, Harlan Mercer's reach had found a door it couldn't open. Ruth talked for 2 hours. She didn't pause, didn't waver, didn't ask for water. She recited names, dates, parcel numbers, dollar amounts, signatures on contracts she'd read by candlelight in her father's study while he slept. Judge Craddock sat across from her, writing it all down in a hand that grew faster and harder with every page. Outside, Pruitt had stopped pounding. That was worse than the noise. "The Sutter Ranch," Ruth said. "Township 12, Range 4. My father filed a competing survey in April of 1872. The original was destroyed in a courthouse fire that he paid a man named Del Hutchins to set. Tom Sutter contested the claim. 3 months later, Sutter was killed during a prisoner transport overseen by Wade Pruitt." Craddock's pen stopped. "You're accusing a United States Marshal of murder." "I'm accusing him of 5 murders. Sutter was just the one people noticed." "And you can name the others?" "James Polk, freight operator out of the Bitterroot. His death was ruled an accident. Wagon went off a cliff. His widow, Ida, is still alive and will testify that Mercer's men sabotaged the axle." Craddock set his pen down. "Ida Polk. I know that name. She filed a complaint 4 years ago. It was dismissed for lack of evidence. Because the evidence was in my father's office, and now it's in my head." The judge studied her. "Miss Mercer, what you're describing is a criminal conspiracy that spans 2 decades and involves elected officials, appointed officers, and federal law enforcement. If even half of what you're saying is true, all of it is true, then you're the most dangerous woman in the territory, and the man standing outside my door knows it." Ruth leaned forward. "Which is why I need you to act now, Judge. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now, before Pruitt finds a way to make this legal." Craddock was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a cabinet, and removed a leather-bound book. He opened it and began writing. "I'm issuing an emergency order of protection in your name. It bars any law enforcement officer from taking you into custody pending a formal judicial review of the allegations you've presented." He looked up. "It won't stop a bullet, but it'll stop an arrest." That's enough for now. There's more. I'm also issuing a subpoena for the original territorial survey records held in this office. If your father's people altered them, the originals will show it. And I'm ordering a federal inquiry into the death of Thomas Sutter. Craddock signed the document with a heavy stroke. Miss Mercer, you should know, once I file these orders, I can't unfile them. Your father will know within days, possibly hours. Good. You may also want to know that Harlan Mercer contributed generously to the campaign of the man who appointed me. That man expected me to be grateful. Craddock smiled thinly. He was disappointed. A knock came at the door. Not the pounding of earlier. This was measured, deliberate. Judge Craddock. Pruitt's voice, calm now, controlled. I have federal authority to detain a suspect in this building. If you obstruct me, I'll file charges against you as well. Craddock walked to the door and opened it. Pruitt stood on the steps, badge catching the late afternoon light, flanked by his two men. Marshal Pruitt, Craddock said, I've just issued an emergency protection order for Ruth Mercer. Any attempt to detain her will be treated as contempt of a federal judicial order. You're welcome to challenge it in court. Pruitt's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recalculation. That woman is a thief and a fugitive. That woman is a witness under the protection of this court. And unless you have a warrant signed by a sitting judge, which you don't because I checked, you have no authority here. You're making a mistake, Craddock. I've been told that before, usually by men who ended up in my courtroom. The judge held up the signed orders. These will be filed with the territorial clerk within the hour. Copies go to Washington by tomorrow's post. I suggest you wire your employer and let him know that his business arrangements are now a matter of federal record. Pruitt stood very still. His eyes moved past Craddock to Ruth, who had come to stand in the doorway behind the judge. She met his gaze without flinching. Your father sends his regards, Pruitt said softly. Send them back, Ruth replied, along with the summons. Pruitt's jaw worked. He looked at Craddock, then at Ruth, then at the documents in the judge's hand. Without another word, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode down Main Street. His men followed. Ruth watched them go. Then her knees buckled. Craddock caught her arm. Steady. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're exhausted, you're malnourished, and you just outran a United States Marshal on a half-dead horse. Sit down before you fall down. She sat. For the first time since the auction yard, the tension in her shoulders released. Not fully, not completely, but enough that she could feel how much it had been costing her to hold it. Judge, she said, there's a man, Silas Cain. He was on the road behind me. Pruitt's men. I'll send someone. Now, please. He's hurt. Craddock called to a clerk in the back room and sent him running for the sheriff. The real sheriff, not Mercer's men. Then he turned back to Ruth. This man, Cain, who is he to you? Ruth thought about the question, about the auction yard and the rope on her wrists, and the single command that had changed everything. Untie her. He's the reason I'm alive, she said. They found Silas a mile outside town, slumped over his horse's neck, one eye swollen shut, blood dried dark down the side of his face. The sheriff's deputy brought him in, draped across his saddle like a sack of grain, and Ruth was waiting on the courthouse steps when they arrived. She didn't run to him. She walked, steady, controlled, the way she did everything. But her hands were shaking when she reached up and helped ease him down from the horse. You look terrible, she said. You should see the other guy. Silas tried to grin and winced. Actually, don't. He looks fine. That's the problem.
Can you walk?
Can I sit down first? They got him inside. Craddock had sent for a doctor, a quiet man named Avery, who cleaned the gash on Silas's cheek, checked his ribs, and declared nothing broken but plenty bruised. Pistol barrel? Avery asked, examining the wound. Marshall's sidearm, Silas said. Avery paused, looked at Craddock, looked back at Silas. I'll note that in my report. You do that. When the doctor left, Silas and Ruth sat alone in Craddock's office. The judge had gone to file his orders, leaving them with coffee and silence. You made it, Silas said. You gave me time. 2 minutes. 2 minutes was everything. Ruth set her cup down. He hit you. Twice. I heard. It's nothing. It's not nothing, Silas. He could have killed you. He didn't. And you got to Craddock. That's what matters. Ruth shook her head. You keep doing that, pushing yourself aside like you don't count, like you're just the man who happened to be there. I am just the man who happened to be there. No, you're not. Ruth's voice cracked for the first time. She pressed her lips together, fighting for control. Do you know what I thought at the auction? When they tied me to those horses and men laughed and bid on livestock while I stood there like I was less than nothing? Silas waited. I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. Not with a gunshot or a knife or even a sentence from a judge. Just erasure. Slow, quiet erasure, until there's nothing left of me that anyone would bother to remember. She swallowed hard. And then you said 2 words. Untie her. And every man in that yard went silent. Not because you were loud, not because you had a gun, because you meant it. You looked at me and you saw a person, and you meant it. Ruth, let me finish. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I have spent 7 months being invisible, being cargo, being the thing no one wanted. And in 1 sentence, you made me real again. So don't tell me you're just the man who happened to be there. You're the only man who saw me. Silas didn't speak for a long time. He looked at his hands, calloused, cracked, still trembling slightly from the ride. The hands of a rancher who'd been losing his whole life and had just started learning why. My mother, he said quietly. After my father died, after Mercer took the south pasture, she used to sit at the kitchen table every night going over the books. Same numbers, same debts, same impossible arithmetic. And every night she'd close the ledger and say, "Tomorrow we'll find a way." She said it so many times I stopped believing her. I thought she was lying to herself. He looked up. She wasn't lying. She was choosing. Every single day she chose to keep going, not because she thought she'd win, because she refused to let them see her quit. She sounds remarkable. She was, and she died alone because nobody helped her carry the weight. His voice roughened. That's why I said untie her, Ruth. Not because I'm brave, because I couldn't stand there and watch it happen again. Ruth reached across the table and took his hand. He let her. Her fingers were still rough, still scarred, but they were warm, and they held on with a strength that had nothing to do with muscle.
We're not alone anymore, she said. Either of us.
Silas looked at her hand holding his, at the woman who'd been sold like broken tack, and had fought her way to a federal judge's office with nothing but her memory and her will. At the scars on her wrists where the rope had been. No, he said. We're not. Craddock returned an hour later with news. The territorial clerk had accepted the filings. The original survey records had been pulled and were being compared with Mercer's filed versions. Discrepancies were already appearing. It started, Craddock said, "but I need to be honest with you both. What happens next won't be fast, and it won't be clean. Mercer has lawyers, connections, and money. He'll fight this at every level."
"Let him fight," Ruth said. "He's never had to fight someone who knows every lie he's told."
"There's something else." Craddock sat down heavily. "I sent a wire to Washington requesting a federal investigation into Marshal Pruitt. The response came back within the hour. Pruitt's been reassigned. Effective immediately, he's no longer authorized to operate in this territory." Silas straightened. "That fast?" "That fast. Which tells me two things. First, Washington already had concerns about Pruitt. Second, someone very high up wants this resolved quietly." Craddock looked at Ruth. "Your father has friends in Washington, but he also has enemies, the kind who've been waiting for exactly this kind of opening." "My father made the mistake powerful men always make," Ruth said. "He assumed that fear was the same as loyalty. The moment his people sense weakness, they'll turn on him to save themselves." "That's already happening. I've received 2 telegrams in the last hour from territorial officials offering to cooperate with the inquiry. Men who, 24 hours ago, would have denied knowing your father's name." Ruth closed her eyes. Something moved across her face. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something closer to grief.
"He's my father,"
she said, so quietly that Silas almost didn't hear it.
"I destroyed my own father."
"He destroyed himself," Silas said. "You just showed people where to look."
"That doesn't make it easier."
"No, it doesn't." Craddock cleared his throat. "Miss Mercer, there's one more matter. The protection order I filed covers you specifically. But Mr. Cain," he turned to Silas, "you have no legal protection. Pruitt may be reassigned, but Mercer's other men aren't. Your ranch is exposed." Silas nodded slowly. "I figured. I can extend the protection order to include you as a material witness, but that requires you to make a formal statement about the fraud perpetrated against your family's land." "I'll make the statement. It means your name goes into the federal record. Mercer will know exactly who you are and where you live. He already knows. He's known since he poisoned my father's cattle and watched him die." Silas's voice was steady. "Put my name down, Judge. All of it. Silas James Cain, Township 8, Range 6. And note that Margaret Cain, my mother, died at 42 from working land that should have been twice its size, because Harlan Mercer stole half of it, and nobody gave a damn." Craddock wrote it down, every word. That evening, the judge arranged rooms for them at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fenton, who asked no questions and served supper without being asked. Ruth ate slowly, mechanically, like someone who'd forgotten how meals worked when they weren't stolen or rationed. Silas sat across from her. His face was swollen, one eye still half shut, but the doctor had done good work, and the pain had settled into something manageable. "What happens to your ranch while we're here?" Ruth asked. "Holt's watching it. I sent word." "You trust him now?" "You asked me that before. The answer's the same. He's a decent man. And right now, decent is the best I've got." Ruth pushed her plate aside. "Silas, when this is over, the inquiry, the hearings, whatever comes, what do you want?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, after, when the dust settles, what do you want your life to look like?" He thought about it, really thought. "I want my land back. All of it. The south pasture, the water rights, the spur access. I want to stand on ground that's mine, free and clear, and know that nobody can take it." "And?" "And I want to stop being angry at my father for dying. He didn't give up. He was beaten. There's a difference, and I spent too many years not knowing it." Ruth nodded. "Anything else?" Silas looked at her across the table, at the woman who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd been sold and silenced and erased, and had come back with a mind like a steel trap and a will that wouldn't bend. "Yeah," he said, "there's something else. But I reckon it's too soon to say it." Ruth's eyes softened. "It's not too soon." "Ruth, I'm not asking you to say it. I'm telling you it's not too soon to feel it." She reached across the table and touched his bruised cheek, gently, barely a breath of contact. "You rode into a marshal's line for me. You took a pistol to the face so I could run. No man has ever—" She stopped, started again. "In my whole life, no one has ever put themselves between me and danger. Not once." "Your mother?" "My mother loved me, but she was afraid of my father. Everyone was." Ruth pulled her hand back. "You weren't afraid." "I was terrified." "But you did it anyway." "That ain't courage, Ruth. That's stubbornness. Cain family specialty." She almost smiled. "I think your mother would disagree." "My mother would have liked you." "Would she?" "She had a weakness for people who were smarter than everyone else in the room, and too polite to say so." This time, Ruth did smile. Small, fragile, real. Like a first green shoot pushing through scorched ground. "I'm not always polite about it." I noticed. They sat in the quiet of Mrs. Fenton's dining room, the sounds of Helena settling into evening around them. Somewhere, a piano played badly. A dog barked. Boots scuffed on boardwalks. The ordinary sounds of a town that didn't know its foundations had just cracked. "Ruth," Silas said, "when this is done, when the hearings are over and Mercer's finished and the land is sorted out, I want you to come back to the ranch." "As what?" "As whatever you want to be. Partner, neighbor, bookkeeper, Lord knows I need one." He paused. "Or something else, if you wanted." Ruth held his gaze. "Something else?" "Yeah." "You're asking me to stay." "I'm asking you to choose. Nobody gets to tell you where you belong anymore. Not your father, not Pruitt, not me. But if you choose," he swallowed, "if you choose, there's a place. And it's yours." Ruth was quiet for a long time, long enough that Silas felt the silence pressing against his chest like a held breath. Then she stood, walked around the table, and sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "My whole life," she said, "men have decided where I go. My father decided I'd marry a stranger. Traders decided I'd be cargo. An auctioneer decided I was worthless." She looked at him. "You're the first person who's ever asked me to decide for myself." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes, Silas." He exhaled. Long, shaking. The kind of breath a man lets out when he realizes the thing he was most afraid of losing is the thing he just got to keep. Ruth leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his cheek against her hair, gently, mindful of the bruise. "We still have a fight ahead," she murmured. "I know." "Mercer won't go quietly." "Never expected him to." "And the ranch needs work. A lot of work." "It does." "Good," Ruth said, "because I'm very good at work." Silas put his arm around her. Not possessive, not protective. Just there. Present. The way a man holds something he's been given freely and intends to keep. Outside Mrs. Fenton's boarding house, Helena went on with its evening, unaware that in a small dining room with bad coffee and a crooked table, two people who'd been broken by the same machine had found in each other the one thing Harlan Mercer's money could never buy: a reason to rebuild. The hearing began on a Tuesday. Judge Craddock had arranged it in the territorial courthouse, a public proceeding, open to anyone who wanted to watch. Ruth had insisted on that. "My father works in shadows," she'd told Craddock. "Put him in daylight, and he shrinks." Silas sat in the front row, his bruised face still swollen but healing, his hat on his knee. Ruth sat at the witness table, spine straight, hands folded, wearing a borrowed dress that Mrs. Fenton had pressed that morning without being asked. She looked calm. Silas knew better. He'd heard her pacing the boarding house floor at 3 a.m, rehearsing numbers under her breath. The courtroom filled fast. Ranchers, merchants, wives, cowboys who'd ridden in from 50 miles out, because word had spread the way it always did in small territories, like fire through dry brush. Harlan Mercer's name was on every tongue, and the people who'd suffered under it wanted to see what happened when someone finally struck a match. Craddock gavelled the room to order. "This is a preliminary hearing into allegations of systematic land fraud, document falsification, and criminal conspiracy within this territory. The primary witness is Miss Ruth Mercer, daughter of Harlan Mercer, who will present testimony from memory regarding documents she personally observed and copied during her time in her father's household." A murmur ran through the crowd. Craddock let it settle. "Miss Mercer, you may begin." Ruth stood. She didn't use notes. She didn't hesitate. She looked out at the packed courtroom and began with a single sentence that landed like a hammer blow. "My father has stolen 63 parcels of land in this territory over the past 19 years, and I can name every one." The room exploded. Craddock banged his gavel. "Order! There will be order!" Ruth waited for the noise to die, then continued. She recited parcel numbers, dates of fraudulent surveys, names of bribed officials, amounts paid, and to whom. She described the system, how Mercer's men would identify a vulnerable ranch, manipulate water rights or access fees to force missed payments, then file competing claims through shell companies that all traced back to Mercer Land and Rail. "The Sutter Ranch," Ruth said, "filed under the name Western Territory Holdings. Actual owner, Harlan Mercer. The Polk Freight Line, seized through a false bankruptcy filing submitted by attorney Gerald Haynes on my father's instructions. The Cain South pasture," she paused and looked at Silas, "taken after the deliberate poisoning of 40 head of cattle ordered by my father in a letter dated November 3, 1874, addressed to a man named Del Hutchins." Silas felt the breath leave his body. He'd known. Ruth had told him. But hearing it spoken aloud, in a courtroom, in front of witnesses, it made it real in a way that private words hadn't. A man in the gallery stood up. "That's my land she's talking about. Section 14, Township 9. They told me I didn't have clear title." Another voice. "Same here. Mercer's people came with papers that said my deed was invalid." Craddock hammered the gavel. "Sit down, both of you. You'll have your chance to speak." Ruth continued for 2 hours. She named 41 separate instances of fraud. She identified 12 officials who'd accepted bribes. She described in precise detail the method by which original survey markers had been moved, replaced, or destroyed. And she did it all from memory, without a single correction. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Not the silence of disinterest. The silence of people who just realized that the ground beneath their feet had been stolen, and someone had finally said it out loud. Craddock spoke into the quiet. "Miss Mercer, you understand that this testimony, if verified, will result in criminal charges against your father." "I understand." "And you're prepared for that?" Ruth's chin lifted. "I've been preparing for it for 7 months, Your Honor. Longer, if I'm honest. I've been preparing for it since I was old enough to understand what my father was doing, and young enough to believe someone would stop him." She paused. "Nobody did." So I'm stopping him myself. The gallery erupted again. This time Craddock didn't try to quiet it. He let the sound wash over the room. Anger, vindication, grief, relief. And when it finally settled, he nodded once. This court will recess for 2 hours. When we reconvene, I'll be taking statements from any party who believes their land was affected by the activities described. Additionally, he turned to the territorial clerk. I want every survey record filed in this territory in the last 20 years pulled and compared with the originals in the Federal Archive. Every single one. The clerk went pale. Your Honor, that's thousands of documents. Then you'd better start now. The recess broke like a dam. People surged forward, toward Ruth, toward Craddock, toward each other. Ranchers who hadn't spoken in years were grabbing each other's arms, comparing stories, realizing for the first time that what had happened to them hadn't been bad luck or bad management. It had been theft. Organized, deliberate, systematic theft. Silas found Ruth near the back of the courtroom, pressed against the wall, breathing hard. The composure she'd held during testimony had cracked the moment the crowd surged, and she was shaking. Hey, he said, putting himself between her and the crowd. You did it. I know. Then why do you look like you're about to fall apart? Because I just destroyed my family in public, in front of strangers. Her voice broke on the last word. I know he deserved it. I know it was right. But he taught me to read, Silas. He held my hand at my mother's funeral. She pressed her fist against her mouth. Silas didn't speak. He put his hand on her shoulder and let her shake. Some things didn't need words. They needed witness. After a moment, Ruth straightened, wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders. I'm fine. You don't have to be fine. Yes, I do, because this isn't over. She looked toward the door. He'll send someone. Not Pruitt. Pruitt's finished. But my father has other resources. Other men. Let him send them. Silas, I'm serious. The hearing was public. By tonight, every telegraph line between here and the East Coast will be carrying this story. My father will know what I've done before sunrise. Good. Let him know. Ruth shook her head. You don't understand. When my father feels cornered, he doesn't retreat. He attacks. And the people closest to his enemies are the first ones he hits. Meaning the ranch. Meaning everything you have. Silas took her hands, both of them, held them steady. Ruth, look at me. She did. Everything I have was built on ground my mother held together with her bare hands, while Mercer's people bled her dry. Every dollar, every acre, every fence post. If he wants to come for it, he can try. But this time, I know the truth. And this time, I'm not alone. He squeezed her hands. Neither are you. A voice cut through the noise of the courtroom. Cain? Silas turned. Holt Dawson stood in the doorway, hat in hand, chest heaving, covered in trail dust. He'd ridden hard to get here. Holt, what are you? They came to your ranch. Holt was breathing too hard to speak easily. He bent over, hands on his knees. Last night, 3 men. Torches. The floor dropped out of Silas's stomach. What? Barn's gone. Corral fence too. Horses got out. I caught one. The other's running loose, somewhere south. Holt straightened. House is standing. I got there before they reached it. Fired 2 shots and they scattered. Ruth grabbed Silas's arm. Her face had gone white. You all right? Silas asked Holt. I'm fine, but they'll come back, and next time they won't scatter so easy. Silas looked at Ruth. She was already thinking. He could see it behind her eyes, the rapid calculation she did when the world shifted. Craddock, she said. We need Craddock, now. They found the judge in his office. Ruth laid it out in 30 seconds. The arson, The timing, the certainty that Mercer had ordered retaliation before the hearing results were even filed. Craddock listened. Then he did something that surprised all of them. He picked up his hat.
"Where are you going?" Ruth asked.
"To the telegraph office. I'm wiring the federal marshal's office in Denver. Not the territorial office, the federal one. I'm requesting armed deputies to protect the Cain Ranch and any other property named in these proceedings." He looked at Silas. "How many neighbors do you have within riding distance?" "Half a dozen, maybe more." "Round them up. Any man who's been cheated by Mercer, any rancher who lost land or cattle or family, bring them in. If Mercer wants a fight, we'll give him one. But we'll do it legally, with federal authority, and every move he makes from this point forward goes into the record." Holt stepped forward. "Judge, there's something else. I wasn't just watching the ranch last night. I was at the saloon earlier, and Virgil Creed was there, drunk and running his mouth." "About what?" "About how Mercer was going to burn Cain out and take the woman back. His words, 'Take the woman back.' Like she was still livestock." Holt looked at Ruth. "Pardon me, ma'am, but you should know. Creed also said Mercer was offering $500 to anyone who brought you back alive." Ruth's expression didn't change. "Alive? That's what he said." "Of course alive. Dead, I'm a martyr. Alive, I'm a daughter who went mad and told lies about her father. He doesn't want me dead. He wants me discredited." Craddock shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. The testimony is on record. Discrediting you won't erase it. Then he'll try to discredit the testimony itself, challenge my mental fitness, claim I was coerced, claim Silas manipulated me." Ruth's mind was moving at full speed now. "We need corroboration, physical evidence that matches what I testified to. The survey records, those will take weeks to compare. We need something faster, something undeniable." She turned to Silas. "Your father's papers, the ranch records, the original deed, the tax payments, the letters from the bank, they're at the house, if the house is still standing." Holt said it is. "Those papers will show the timeline, when the cattle died, when the payments were missed, when the foreclosure was filed. If it matches what I testified to down to the dates, that's corroboration." Silas nodded. "Then I'm going back." "Not alone. Ruth, you need to stay here, under Craddock's protection." "I need to be where the evidence is. If Mercer's men destroyed your barn, they'll go for the house next. And if those papers burn, my testimony becomes one woman's word against the most powerful man in the territory." Craddock intervened. "She's right, Cain. The documents in that house are now evidence in a federal proceeding. They need to be secured." "Then send your deputies." "They won't arrive for 3 days. Can your house wait 3 days?" Silas looked at Holt. Holt shook his head. "Then we go now," Ruth said. "All of us." They rode out within the hour. Silas, Ruth, Holt, and 2 ranchers who'd been in the courtroom gallery and had volunteered before anyone asked them. One was a man named Carl Jessup, who'd lost 80 acres to Mercer in '76. The other was a woman, Eleanor Bryce, 60 years old, rifle across her saddle, who'd buried her husband after a Mercer foreclosure drove him to drink and a frozen creek. "Mrs. Bryce," Ruth said, riding beside her, "you don't have to do this." "Honey, I've been waiting 12 years to do this." Eleanor's voice was iron, wrapped in flannel. "My Thomas died believing he'd failed. I aim to make sure the record shows different." They reached the ranch by nightfall. The barn was a blackened skeleton, still smoking faintly. The corral fence lay in splintered pieces, but the house stood, dark, quiet, intact. Silas dismounted and went inside first, rifle ready. Empty. Nothing disturbed. He lit the lamp and pulled a wooden box from beneath the floorboards in the bedroom. His father's papers, kept the way his mother had kept them, in order, in sequence, in the desperate hope that someday they'd matter. Ruth spread them across the kitchen table with the reverence of a woman handling sacred text. She sorted through the stack, pulling documents with quick, certain hands. Here, the cattle loss report. 40 head, November 1874. Date matches my testimony exactly. She pulled another page. The bank notice. First missed payment, January 1875. 2 months after the poisoning. Another. Foreclosure filing, March 1875. Submitted by Gerald Haynes, attorney. Same man I named in the hearing. It all matches, Silas said. Every date, every name, every dollar. Ruth looked up at him. This is proof, Silas. Not just my word. Paper proof. Your mother kept records that confirm everything I testified to. Silas picked up a page from the bottom of the stack. It was his mother's handwriting, cramped, exhausted, written late at night by lamplight. A note, not a letter. Just a few lines scrawled on the back of a feed receipt. Something is wrong. The water was clear on Monday. By Wednesday, the cattle were dying. This is not natural. I cannot prove it. Nobody will listen. But I am writing it down because if I don't, it disappears. And I will not let it disappear. His hands trembled. He read it again and again. She knew, he whispered. My mother knew. Ruth moved to stand beside him. She read the note over his shoulder. Her hand came to rest on his back, steady and warm. She couldn't prove it, Ruth said softly, but she refused to let it be forgotten. She wrote it down for you, Silas, so that someday you'd know the truth. He couldn't speak. The grief hit him like a wall, not the dull, familiar grief he'd carried for years, but something sharp and new. The grief of understanding, of finally knowing that his mother hadn't failed. She'd fought, alone, exhausted, with no one to help and no one to believe her. She'd fought. And she'd left him the proof. We file this with the court, Ruth said. All of it. Your mother's testimony. Because that's what this is, Silas. Testimony. Written down, dated, in her own hand. Along with the ranch records and my oral testimony, this creates a chain of evidence that Mercer can't break. Do it, Silas said. His voice was raw but steady. File every page, and put my mother's name on the record. Margaret Cain. I want it there. It will be. Holt appeared in the doorway. Riders coming, from the north. 2, maybe 3. The room went still. Ruth gathered the papers and held them against her chest. Silas picked up his rifle. Carl Jessup and Eleanor Bryce were already outside, positioned on either side of the porch. How far? Silas asked. Half a mile, moving slow. Could be anybody. Could be. Silas stepped onto the porch. But it ain't. The riders came in under a white flag. 3 men, well-dressed, clean boots, no guns visible. The lead rider was a man Silas had never seen. Tall, gray-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than the ranch house. He dismounted and stood at the gate, hands raised. I'm looking for Ruth Mercer. Ruth stepped out beside Silas. You found her. The man studied her face. His expression was unreadable. My name is Charles Whitford. I'm an attorney from St. Louis. I represent a group of investors who have a significant interest in the future of Mercer Land and Rail. Investors, Ruth repeated. Your testimony at the hearing today has caused considerable concern. The company's stock has dropped 30% since the Telegraph carried the news east. My clients have sent me to negotiate. Negotiate what? A settlement. Full restitution of all fraudulently obtained lands. Dissolution of Mercer Land and Rail. Establishment of a compensation fund for affected families. He paused. And a personal guarantee that Harlan Mercer will face no criminal charges. The silence that followed was absolute. Ruth descended the porch steps slowly. She walked to the gate and stood face to face with Whitford, close enough that he took a half step back. Your clients want me to let my father walk free. They want a resolution that avoids a prolonged legal battle that would destroy the company entirely. Mr. Mercer is prepared to surrender all contested properties and retire from public life. Retire? Ruth's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. Tom Sutter is dead. James Polk is dead. Margaret Cain worked herself into a grave at 42. My father didn't just steal land, Mr. Whitford. He killed people. And you want me to let him retire. Whitford shifted his weight. Miss Mercer, I understand your anger. No, you don't. You understand stock prices and liability exposure and quarterly earnings. Ruth stepped closer. Here is my counteroffer. Every acre goes back. Every family is compensated. And Harlan Mercer faces a federal grand jury. All of it. Or I spend the next 10 years testifying in every courtroom between here and Washington until there isn't a rock left for him to hide under. Whitford stared at her. You'd bankrupt the company. The company was built on stolen ground. It deserves to fall. And the employees? The workers? The towns that depend on Mercer Freight and Rail? Ruth didn't hesitate. Rebuild. Under honest management, with clean titles and fair wages. The land doesn't disappear when the thief goes to prison, Mr. Whitford. It stays. And the people who were cheated out of it are still here, waiting to work it. Whitford looked at his companions. They said nothing. He turned back to Ruth. I'll convey your terms. You do that, and tell my father something else. Ruth's voice dropped to barely a whisper, but every person in that yard heard it. Tell him his daughter remembers the day he taught her to read. She remembers the book. It was about a girl who found her way home through the woods. Tell him she found her way home, and she's not leaving. Whitford mounted his horse. He looked down at Ruth one last time, with something that might have been respect, or might have been fear. You're very much like him, you know, he said. No, Ruth replied. I'm what he should have been. The riders turned and disappeared down the road. When they were gone, Silas came down the porch steps and stood beside Ruth. Neither of them spoke for a while. You turned down a settlement, he said finally. I turned down silence. There's a difference? All the difference in the world. Ruth looked at the burned barn, the broken corral, the house still standing despite everything. My mother used to say that the truth is like water. You can dam it, divert it, poison it, but you can't make it stop. Smart woman. She married a monster, but yes, she was smart. Ruth turned to face him. Silas, it's going to be hard. The hearings, the trials, the years of fighting. They'll come for us in ways we can't predict. I know. And the ranch needs rebuilding, from the ground up. I know that too. Good. She took his hand. Because I have plans for that south pasture. Silas looked at her, at the woman who'd been thrown in free with 2 horses, who'd been called worthless by men who didn't deserve to speak her name, who'd carried an empire's secrets in her memory through 7 months of hell and delivered them to the one judge in the territory who couldn't be bought. Plans, huh? Detailed plans, with projections. Lord help me. Ruth smiled, real, wide, unguarded, the first full smile he'd ever seen from her. It transformed her face the way sunrise transforms a landscape. And Silas Cain, who'd spent his whole life bracing for the next loss, realized with a jolt that he was looking at something he'd never expected to have. A future. Eleanor Bryce came to stand beside them, rifle over her shoulder, watching the empty road. "They'll be back," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Silas agreed. "Good." Eleanor straightened her hat. "I didn't ride all the way out here just to watch." Holt appeared from the barn wreckage, hauling a salvageable beam. "This wood's still good. We can start rebuilding tomorrow." Carl Jessup was already measuring fence posts. "I'll bring lumber from my place. My boys can help." Ruth watched them, strangers who'd become allies, neighbors who'd become witnesses, ordinary people who'd spent years believing they were alone in what had been done to them. She watched them pick up tools and start working, and something settled in her chest that she hadn't felt since before her mother died. Belonging. Silas put his arm around her. She leaned into him, solid and certain. "Ruth." "Welcome home." She closed her eyes. The words landed in a place she'd thought was gone, the part of her that still believed in safety, in permanence, in the possibility that a woman who'd been erased from the world could write herself back in. "Home," she repeated, and the word tasted like something she'd been starving for. Around them, the work continued. Hammer strikes and voices and the scrape of wood on wood. The sounds of a ranch being rebuilt by hands that had every reason to quit and no intention of doing so. The sounds of people who'd been told they were worthless, proving with every nail and every board and every stubborn, determined breath that the world had been wrong about them all along. Silas Cain had gone to an auction with $15 and a prayer, looking for 2 horses to save a dying ranch. He'd come home with something the auctioneer couldn't have sold for any price. A woman with a mind like a vault, a heart like a furnace, and a will that not even the most powerful man in the territory could break. They'd called her worthless, thrown her in free with the livestock, laughed while she stood in chains. She tore their empire down with nothing but the truth and the memory of a mother who told her that water can't be stopped. And the cowboy who'd said, "Untire," who'd been too stubborn to walk away, too decent to look the other way, too much his mother's son to let injustice stand. He finally understood what Margaret Cain had meant all those years ago, when she'd close the ledger each night and say, "Tomorrow we'll find a way." She hadn't been talking about money. She'd been talking about this. About the moment when the losing stops. Not because the fight is over, but because you finally find someone worth fighting beside. Ruth Calloway. Silas Cain. A burned barn, a broken fence, and a truth that no amount of money or power or silence could bury. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.